The call should not have existed.
The forbidden bloodline, an arcane channel seared into Aurelian Noctur's very essence, could only ignite under one condition: extinction. Not war. Not betrayal. Extinction. The wards protecting it had stood unbreached for 500 years, guarded by blood oaths that would kill anyone who dared invoke it frivolously. Aurelian was deep in the obsidian conclave when the blood mark on his wrist erupted in white-hot agony. 13 elder vampires knelt beneath a cathedral ceiling of carved bone and suspended crimson fire, negotiating a covenant that would end centuries of coven bloodshed. The vampire king sat at the head of the obsidian table, his silver eyes colder than the void, his presence so absolute that even immortals dared not breathe too loudly in his company. Before we begin, let me ask you something. What would you sacrifice to protect the one thing you were never supposed to love? By the end of this story, you'll understand why a king who ruled for 3,000 years froze the moment he walked through his own doors. If you're ready for a tale of forbidden love, ancient power, and impossible choices, stay with me. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe now, because tomorrow's story is already waiting. Then the mark burned. The voice that followed was barely a whisper, threaded directly into his consciousness, trembling, terrified, and utterly forbidden. "My king, please come home now." Saris Vale never begged. In 17 years of service, she had never raised her voice, never questioned an order, never broken a single law. "She'll destroy her." The word her carved through Aurelian's chest like a blade made of ice and revelation. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply vanished, a detonation of shadow that left treaties ensigned, elders screaming, and the blood-veiled dominion fracturing as its sovereign abandoned the world. But what awaited him when he tore through the citadel doors wasn't just a threat to his bloodline. It was the moment that would force the immortal king to choose between the throne he had bled centuries to build and the one fragile, forbidden thing he could not afford to lose. The atmosphere in the conclave of shattered thrones reeked of old magic and older grudges. Crimson firelight danced across vaulted ceilings carved from the bones of forgotten gods, casting shadows that moved like predators along obsidian walls. The air itself felt heavy, thick with incense, blood wine, and the suffocating weight of immortal egos colliding. Aurelian Enzo Noctur sat at the head of the longest table in the known world. He was an immortal of 32 centuries, though he appeared no older than his mid-30s, silver eyes like winter storms, bone-white hair that fell past his shoulders, and a face carved with such brutal precision it seemed sculpted rather than born. He wore black velvet and crimson silk beneath a coat lined with shadow thread, his clawed fingers steepled before him as he stared down Lord Carveth of the Thornvale Coven. "You are asking for territories you have not earned," Aurelian said, his voice a low, terrible baritone that didn't need volume to command absolute attention. "The southern bloodlands remain mine until I decide otherwise." Carveth's fangs flashed. "The southern bloodlands were promised to my house 300 years ago. Promised by a king who is now dust," Aurelian interrupted, leaning forward just slightly. "I am not that king. And you would do well to remember that I do not honor the debts of the dead." The tension spiked. Lord Carveth's hand drifted toward the hilt of a bone dagger at his waist. Around the table, 12 other elders shifted, some in anticipation, others in barely concealed fear. This was the moment, the tipping point between a historic peace and a blood-soaked massacre. And then it happened. The burn. Aurelian's wrist erupted in white-hot, searing agony. He didn't cry out. Centuries of discipline strangled the instinct, but his entire body went rigid. The blood mark, hidden beneath layers of enchantment and flesh, ignited like a brand pressed into his very soul. The forbidden bloodline had been invoked. It wasn't possible. Aurelian froze. He never froze. Carveth smirked, mistaking the hesitation for weakness. "Is something wrong, my king? Feeling unwell?" Aurelian didn't hear him. His mind had gone silent, locked onto the arcane thread now vibrating through his consciousness, a connection that should have remained dormant until the world itself ended. Then came the voice. My king, Ceres. Her mental tone was so broken, so terrified, that for a fraction of a second Aurelian thought she was dying. Please come home now.
No.
Not dying.
Begging.
Ceres Vale did not beg. In 17 years of service, through plagues and assassination attempts and political purges, she had never once faltered. She was silence incarnate, loyalty bound in flesh. And now she was breaking the highest law of the Dominion. She'll destroy her. The word here detonated inside Aurelian's chest. Not it. Not the asset. Not the secret. Her. Naira.
His daughter.
Aurelian stood so abruptly, his chair shattered against the stone floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Every elder in the room flinched. Some reached for weapons, others for magic. This meeting, Aurelian said, his voice barely above a whisper but laced with such raw, primal fury that the temperature in the chamber dropped 10 degrees, is over. You do not walk away from this table, Carveth roared, slamming his fist down hard enough to crack the obsidian surface. We have not. Aurelian raised one hand. Shadow exploded outward from his body like a living storm, snuffing out every crimson flame in the chamber and plunging the conclave into absolute darkness. When the light returned a heartbeat later, the vampire king was gone, dissolved into the void, leaving nothing but the scent of blood magic and the faint, lingering echo of his voice. Touch nothing. Harm no one. Or I will erase your bloodlines from history. The elders sat in stunned silence. And then, as one, they began to scream. As Aurelian tore through the space between worlds, ripping open blood portals that hadn't been used in centuries, burning through wards that would kill a lesser vampire instantly, his mind raced faster than his body. She'll destroy her. There was only one she who would dare. Vespera Kane, his betrothed. The woman chosen by Coven law to stand beside him and unite two of the most powerful vampire houses in existence. Beautiful, ambitious, merciless. And she had found Naira. The Citadel's hidden wing was supposed to be impenetrable, protected by blood oaths, ancient wards, and the silent loyalty of a single maid who had been entrusted with the one secret that could unravel Aurelian's entire reign. But Vespera was brilliant. She was patient, and she believed that sentiment had no place in rule. If she had discovered Naira's existence, she wouldn't simply kill the child in secret. She would make it public. A lesson. A warning. Proof that the Vampire King's bloodline had been compromised by mortal weakness. Aurelian's claws extended, shadow dripping from his fingertips as he shredded through the final barrier separating him from his citadel. Hold on, Ceres. Hold on, Naira. I'm coming. But even as he materialized in the grand hall, even as he felt the wards collapsing and heard the distant sound of a child screaming, Aurelian knew, with cold and terrible certainty, that he was already too late to stop what had begun. The Bloodvale Citadel was a fortress masquerading as a palace. Towering spires of black stone pierced the perpetual twilight sky, surrounded by enchanted forests where nothing mortal dared tread. Inside, the halls gleamed with polished marble and crystalline chandeliers, but beneath the beauty lay layers of deadly magic, wards that could incinerate intruders, blood golems that patrolled in silence, and enough hidden blades to arm a small army. Ceres Vale adjusted the white lace collar of her uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she descended the servant staircase. She hated days like this. Days when the king was away always felt exposed. As if the walls themselves sensed his absence and grew thinner, more vulnerable. Today, that feeling was worse than usual. Ceres. The voice was silk and venom. Ceres froze on the landing, her heart sinking as she turned to face the woman standing in the grand foyer below. Vespera Kane. She was stunning in the way a viper is stunning, lethally beautiful and utterly aware of it. Her gown was deep burgundy, tailored to perfection, with a neckline that plunged daringly low and sleeves that flared like dark wings. Her raven-black hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and her crimson eyes, the mark of ancient vampire nobility, glittered with cold amusement. She wasn't supposed to be here. The wedding was still 2 months away. Lady Kane, Sarah said, bowing her head respectfully. I wasn't informed of your arrival. Shall I prepare the guest chambers? Guest chambers? Vespera laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Darling, I'm not a guest. This will be my home soon enough. I thought I'd inspect it thoroughly. Sarah's stomach twisted. Of course, my lady. Is there anything specific you require? Vespera's gaze drifted past Sarah's, toward the eastern corridor. The one that led to the sealed wing. The one that was always locked. Always off limits. What's behind those doors? Vespera asked, her tone deceptively casual. Storage, my lady. Saris lied smoothly, though her pulse hammered against her throat. Old furnishings. The king plans to renovate eventually. Vespera's smile didn't reach her eyes. Storage, she repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. How dull. She took a step toward the corridor. Saris moved instinctively, placing herself between Vespera and the eastern wing. My lady, I'm afraid that area is currently unsafe. Structural concerns. Slap. The sound cracked through the marble hall like a whip. Saris stumbled backward, her hand flying to her burning cheek, tears stinging her eyes. Vespera loomed over her, crimson eyes blazing. Do not, she hissed, presume to tell me where I may or may not go in my future home. You are a servant, Saris. Nothing more. And servants who forget their place tend to disappear. Saris lowered her gaze, swallowing the bitter taste of fear. Yes, my lady. Forgive me. Vespera straightened, smoothing her gown with practiced grace.
Good.
Now run along. I'll explore on my own. Saris turned and fled up the stairs, her mind racing. She had to get to Naira. She had to lock the inner wards. She had to. A crash echoed from below. Then the sound of splintering wood. And a child's terrified scream.
No.
Saris didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The blood portal tore reality, like a wound. Aurelian Noctur plunged through the rift between worlds, shadow and crimson lightning crackling around him as he hurtled through the void. The portal screamed, a sound only he could hear, the death wail of magic being forced beyond its limits. Even for an immortal, this was agony. His veins burned as if filled with molten silver. Every cell in his ancient body protested the speed, the violence, the sheer wrongness of compressing a 3-hour journey into minutes. Blood seeped from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes, the price of velocity no creature was meant to achieve. He didn't slow down. She'll destroy her. The words looped endlessly through his mind, each repetition driving him faster, deeper into the churning darkness between dimensions. Naira,
His daughter. His secret. His lie.
7 years ago, she had been born in a hidden chamber beneath this very citadel, a room sealed by blood oaths and silenced by magic so absolute that even the walls couldn't remember what they'd witnessed. Aurelian remembered everything. The woman's name had been Alara, a mortal, a scholar who had stumbled into his territory pursuing ancient texts, unaware she was trespassing on land where humans were forbidden. He should have killed her. Instead, he'd been curious. She hadn't begged, hadn't screamed. She'd simply looked at him, at the vampire king in all his terrible glory, and asked if he'd read the Codex of Fallen Stars. One conversation became 10. 10 became a year. A year became the most dangerous mistake of his immortal existence. When Alara died giving birth, her final words were a whisper. Hide her. They'll kill her if they know. Aurelian had held the tiny, warm, impossibly fragile thing in his arms, this half-mortal child with her mother's dark curls and his silver eyes, and made a vow that would damn his entire reign. No one would ever know she existed. Another portal. Another scream of tortured magic. Aurelian emerged briefly into the physical world, a desolate cliffside beneath a blood-red moon, only to tear open another rift immediately. His hands shook, his vision blurred. He was moving faster than he'd moved in 500 years, and his body was beginning to fracture under the strain. Worth it, he thought savagely. She's worth it. But guilt clawed at him with every heartbeat. He had hidden Naira, protected her, loved her in the only way a creature like him knew how, from a distance, through intermediaries, in absolute secrecy. And in doing so, he had left her vulnerable. Because the lie at the heart of his reign wasn't just that Naira existed. It was that loving her made him weak. Every coven lord, every rival bloodline, every ambitious parasite circling his throne believed the same thing. Aurelian Nocthur was untouchable because he cared for nothing. No family, no heirs, no sentiment. The vampire king who ruled through cold calculation and merciless pragmatism. If they knew about Naira, if they discovered that the immortal sovereign had a mortal daughter hidden away like a shameful secret, they wouldn't just come for her. They would tear the Bloodveil dominion apart. Which was why 3 months ago Aurelian had agreed to the betrothal. Vespera Kane had entered the throne room like a conqueror claiming territory. Beautiful.
Poised. Deadly.
My king, she'd said, kneeling with perfect grace. I accept your proposal. Our union will bring peace to the covens and strength to both our houses. She'd smiled then, a smile that didn't reach her crimson eyes. I will be the queen you need. Cold where you must be cold. Ruthless where you must be ruthless. Together, we will be unstoppable. Aurelian had seen it immediately, the ambition burning beneath her practiced devotion. Vespera didn't want to stand beside him. She wanted to stand above him. But the alliance was necessary. The Kane bloodline commanded half the eastern territories. Without their support, the fragile peace he'd spent centuries building would collapse. So he'd agreed, and told himself he could control her. The next portal nearly killed him. Aurelian collapsed onto cold stone, blood pouring from his mouth as his body convulsed. The citadel was close now, so close he could feel its wards pulsing in the distance like a dying heartbeat. Except they were dying. His eyes snapped open. The outer wards, the ones that protected the eastern wing, the hidden corridors, the nursery were collapsing. Not naturally. Not through decay. Someone was dismantling them from the inside. Betrayal. One of his own people had opened the doors for Vespera. Rage flooded through him, hot and vicious, momentarily eclipsing the pain. He forced himself upright, shadow coiling around his trembling form like armor. Hold on, Ceres.
Just hold on.
Ceres pressed her back against the nursery door, her arms spread wide as if she could physically block the inevitable. Lady Kane, she said, her voice shaking but steady. Please. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Vespera interrupted, examining her nails with casual cruelty. The king has been hiding something.
Someone.
And you've been complicit. Behind the door, Ceres could hear Naira's muffled sobs. She's just a child, Ceres whispered. She's done nothing wrong. Vespera's eyes flashed. She exists. That's wrong enough. A steward appeared at the end of the hall. Corvin, the head of the Citadel Guard. His face was carefully blank. The wards are down, Lady Kane, he said quietly. Traitor. Ceres's heart shattered. Thank you, Corvin. Vespera purred.
Now, Ceres.
Move aside, or I'll have you moved. Ceres didn't move. She couldn't. He felt at the moment the final ward collapsed, a psychic snap that reverberated through his connection to the Citadel. The nursery was exposed. Vespera was inside. Aurelian tore open one last portal, the effort ripping a scream from his throat as his magic frayed at the edges. The void swallowed him whole, dragging him through impossible distances in a blur of pain and fury. But as he hurtled toward home, another sensation crashed through him. Something was waking inside the Citadel. Something old, primal, terrified. Naira. His daughter carried blood from two worlds, mortal warmth and vampire eternity. The combination was unstable, dormant, unpredictable. And when a half-mortal child with that much latent power felt true, soul-deep fear, the magic didn't ask permission. It exploded. Aurelian's blood ran cold. If Naira's power awakened now, untrained and uncontrolled, she could destroy herself. Or worse, she could destroy everything. The citadel, the wards, Ceres. He pushed harder, faster, bleeding from every pore as the final portal tore open before him. But even as he emerged into the grand hall of his own fortress, even as he felt the temperature spike and heard the distant sound of glass shattering, Aurelian knew with terrible certainty that he wasn't racing to save Naira from Vespera. He was racing to save everyone from what Naira was about to become. 4 hours earlier, Naira Nocthur was drawing stars. She sat cross-legged on the plush carpet of her room, a space that existed in defiance of the citadel's cold grandeur. Soft pastels replaced dark stone. Toys lined handcrafted shelves. Sunlight, carefully filtered through enchanted windows, pooled across the floor like liquid gold. The child herself was a contradiction wrapped in innocence. 7 years old, with dark curls that tumbled past her shoulders and silver eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly light. Her skin held warmth no full-blooded vampire possessed, flushed cheeks, a heartbeat that echoed softly through the room, breath that fogged the air on cold mornings. She hummed as she drew, her small hand gripping a charcoal pencil far too tightly. "That's a beautiful little star," Sarah said from the doorway, carrying a tray of tea and honey cakes. Naira beamed. "It's Papa's constellation." "See? The one he told me about last time." The last time was 3 months ago. Aurelian's visits were rare, brief, and always under cover of absolute darkness. He would appear like a phantom, spend an hour reading to Naira or answering her endless questions, and vanish before dawn could threaten his presence. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all they had. "He's coming back soon, isn't he?" Naira asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Papa promised he'd teach me the names of the old gods." Sarah set the tray down carefully, her chest tightening. "Your father is very busy, Naira. Keeping the Dominion safe is important work." "More important than me?" The question landed like a knife. Sarah knelt beside the child, gently brushing a curl from her face. "Nothing is more important than you. Not to him. Not to me. He stays away to protect you, darling. Do you understand?" Naira's silver eyes, so unnervingly like Aurelian's, searched Sarah's face. "Because I'm different," she said quietly. "Because I'm wrong." "You are not wrong," Sarah said fiercely, taking the child's small hands in hers. "You are extraordinary. You are loved. And you are safe here." Even as she said it, a chill crept down her spine. Something felt off today. The citadel was too quiet. An hour passed in fragile normalcy. Saris played games with Naira, simple things, mortal things. They built towers from wooden blocks and knocked them down with laughter. They read from a storybook about brave knights and cunning dragons. They sang old lullabies that Saris's own mother had taught her a lifetime ago. But the wrongness persisted. "Saris?" Naira tilted her head, her expression suddenly distant. Why did all the footsteps stop? The cereal froze. The child was right. The citadel was always filled with sound, servants moving through corridors, guards patrolling, the distant hum of enchantments maintaining the ancient structure. It was a living place, breathing with purpose. Now it was silent. "Stay here," Saris whispered, rising to her feet. "Play with your toys. I'll be right back." She slipped into the corridor, her heart hammering. The eastern wing was supposed to be sealed, protected. Only 3 people in the entire citadel even knew it existed: Aurelian, herself, and voices. Saris pressed herself against the wall, listening. Finally found it. Took long enough. "Are you certain?" "If we're wrong." "We're not wrong. Look at the wards. They're mortal touched. No pureblood would need such protections. The king will slaughter us if he finds out we helped her." The king will thank us. Vespera Kane will be our queen. She'll reward loyalty. Cerys's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Naira. The mistake should never have been born, the first voice continued. Half-mortal abomination. She's a fracture in the bloodline. A weakness. Cerys didn't wait to hear more. She ran. When she burst back into the nursery, Naira was standing in the center of the room, staring at her hands. The toys had melted. Not burned. Melted. The wooden blocks were warped and steaming. The storybook's pages had curled and browned at the edges. The air shimmered with heat that had no source. I didn't mean to, Naira whispered, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. I got scared, and then I felt warm and I... It's all right, Cerys said, kneeling and pulling the child into her arms despite the unnatural heat radiating from her small body. You're all right. It was an accident. But her mind was racing. Naira's power was waking. The child had always been different, warmer than she should be, stronger than a mortal child, with eyes that occasionally gleamed silver in darkness. But this was the first time her abilities had manifested physically. And if Vespera discovered that Naira wasn't just half-mortal, but powerful, she wouldn't just kill her. She'd make it a spectacle. Proof that sentiment was weakness. That Aurelian's secret had been a threat to the Dominion all along. Cerys's decision crystallized in an instant. She had to invoke the forbidden bloodline, even if it meant her own death. Even if Aurelian himself ordered her execution for breaking the highest law. Naira was worth it. Cerys locked the inner wards, ancient protections she wasn't supposed to know how to access, and pressed her wrist against the blood seal hidden beneath the nursery's floor. The magic resisted. She wasn't bonded to it, wasn't meant to touch it. She pressed harder, letting her own blood seep into the grooves. Please, she whispered, please let me through. The seal flared. Pain lanced up her arm as the forbidden channel opened, a connection that burned through her mortal flesh like acid. And then she felt him. Aurelian's presence, distant and vast and terrifyingly cold. My king, she gasped into the void. Please come home now. Silence. Then his voice, threaded with ice and fury. Cerys, what have you done? She'll destroy her, Cerys sobbed. Vespera found her. She's coming. I can't stop her alone. The connection severed. But Cerys felt the shift in the air, a disturbance in reality itself, as the vampire king abandoned the world to answer her call. Behind her, Naira whimpered. Cerys? What's happening? Why are you bleeding? Everything's going to be fine, little star, Cerys lied, wrapping her burned wrist in cloth. Your papa's coming home. The temperature in the citadel dropped. Cerys felt it before she heard it, the wrongness of another presence invading their sanctuary. Footsteps. Measured. Confidence. Pull. Then Vespera's voice, echoing through the corridors like poisoned honey. Cerys, darling, I know you're in there, and I know what you're hiding. Naira's small hand clutched Cerys's sleeve. Is that the bad lady? She whispered. Cerys pulled the child close, her mind cycling through impossible options. The inner wards would hold. For a while. But Vespera had someone on the inside, someone dismantling protections from within. They were trapped. Listen to me, Cerys said, gripping Naira's shoulders. Whatever happens, stay behind me. Don't use your power. Don't let her see what you can do. Can you promise me that? Naira nodded, trembling. The door shuddered. Once. Twice. On the third impact, the wood splintered. And Vespera, Kane stepped through the threshold of the hidden wing, her crimson eyes gleaming with triumph and malice. She smiled. Hello, little mistake, she purred, her gaze locking onto Naira. I've been so looking forward to meeting you. Behind her, the corridor filled with shadow. Not Aurelian shadow. Something else. Something complicated. The citadel itself had turned traitor. And innocence, warm, fragile, laughing innocence, was no longer safe. Can we just appreciate Cerys for a moment? An ordinary woman standing against impossible odds. That's the kind of character that makes stories unforgettable. If you're rooting for her, drop a comment. And hey, if you're loving this story, subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's tale. It's going to be just as powerful. Now, back to the story. Vespera Kane moved through the shattered doorway like death wearing silk. She was breathtaking in the way a blade is breathtaking, polished, precise, designed for a single purpose. Her burgundy gown flowed like spilled wine, the fabric so fine it seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, cold and perfect. Her raven hair was swept into an elaborate style that must have taken hours, not a single strand out of place despite the violence of her entrance. But it was her eyes that revealed the truth. The crimson and cruel, they swept across the nursery with the detached interest of a collector examining livestock. "How quaint," Vespera said, her voice honey laced with arsenic. "Pastels.
Toys.
Sunlight." She turned that terrible smile on Saris. "Tell me, did you truly believe this?" She gestured dismissively at the warm, living space. "Could hide what he is?" "What is she?" Saris stepped in front of Naira, her body a living shield. "Lady Kane, please. Whatever you think you know." "I know," Vespera interrupted, examining her nails with practiced boredom, "that Aurelian Nocther has been lying to every coven, every bloodline, every ally for 7 years. I know that he broke the oldest laws of our kind by breeding with a mortal. And I know," her eyes snapped up, pinning Ceres like an insect, "that you helped him hide the evidence." Behind Saris, Naira made a small, frightened sound. Vespera's smile widened. There she is, the little fracture. Vespera had stood in the Citadel's grand archive, ancient tomes spread before her like dissected corpses. It had taken months. Months of careful observation, strategic questioning, and precisely placed bribes. The servants here were loyal, terrifyingly so, but loyalty could be purchased if one knew the right pressure points. A guard with a gambling debt. A steward whose daughter needed expensive medicine. A scholar who wanted access to forbidden texts. Everyone had a price. And Vespera Kane was very, very wealthy. The final piece had come from the blood records, genealogies written in enchanted ink that couldn't lie. She'd found the entry buried beneath layers of concealment magic, barely visible even when she knew where to look. Naira Nocther, born 7th moon, 7th year of the New Covenant. Mother, Alara Voss, deceased. Father, redacted. But the redaction was sloppy. Amateur. She'd peeled it back with forbidden magic purchased from an exiled witch, and there it was. Father, Aurelian Enzo Nocther, vampire king of the Blood-Veiled Dominion. Vespera laughed. Not from joy. From vindication. She'd always sensed something was wrong. Aurelian was too careful, too controlled, too obsessed with maintaining certain sections of his citadel under absolute secrecy. A king with nothing to hide didn't need so many locks. Corvin, she'd called, and the head steward had appeared immediately, his expression carefully neutral. Yes, Lady Kane? Dismantle the eastern wards.
Now.
My lady, the king's orders. She'd placed a velvet pouch on the table between them. It clinked with the weight of gold and something more valuable. Deeds to land, titles, power. The king, Vespera said softly, is about to learn a very important lesson about the cost of sentiment. You can either be rewarded for your wisdom or executed for your loyalty. Choose quickly. Corvin had taken the pouch. They always did. Now, standing in the nursery with her prize trembling before her, Vespera felt the intoxicating rush of absolute control. This wasn't just about eliminating a threat. This was about sending a message that would echo through every coven in existence. The age of sentimental kings is over. Saris Vale, Vespera said, circling slowly like a predator. 17 years of service. Impeccable record. The king trusts you completely. She paused. Or he did. Tell me, what do you think he'll do to you when he discovers you invoked the forbidden bloodline? that you broke the highest law of the Dominion. Ceres's face went pale, but she didn't move. He'll understand, she whispered. Will he? Vespera laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. Aurelian Nocter built his entire reign on absolute law. No exceptions. No sentiment. No weakness. You just shattered that foundation. Even if he loves the child, she spat the word like poison. He'll have to destroy you publicly, to prove the law still matters. Then he'll destroy me, Ceres said, her voice steadier now. But he'll save her first. Vespera's smile faded. That, she said coldly, is where you're wrong. She moved to the window, gazing out at the citadel grounds where armed guards now stood at every entrance. I've sealed the citadel, Vespera announced casually. No one enters. No one leaves. The wards have been reconfigured to answer only to me. She glanced back at Ceres. Even when Aurelian arrives, and oh, he will arrive, won't he? Burning through dimensions like a desperate fool, he'll find his own fortress locked against him. You can't. I can. I have. And by the time he breaks through, because he will break through, it will already be over. Naira whimpered, pressing closer to Ceres. Vespera's gaze fixed on the child with clinical detachment. Do you know what you are, little one? She asked, her voice almost gentle. You're not a daughter. You're not even really a person. You're a liability. A crack in the foundation of your father's empire. She's a child, Ceres said through gritted teeth. She's a mistake, Vespera corrected. And mistakes must be corrected. Publicly. Permanently. She turned to Corvin, who stood in the doorway with 3 other guards, all wearing expressions of carefully maintained neutrality. Seal this wing, Vespera ordered. No one enters without my permission. And bring me, she paused considering, something sharp. Silver, preferably. I want this to be memorable. One of the guards hesitated. Lady Kane, if the king. Vespera moved faster than mortal eyes could track. One moment she was by the window. The next, her hand was around the guard's throat, lifting him off the ground with inhuman strength. The king, she hissed, her fangs extending, will thank me for removing the weakness that would have destroyed him. Now, do as I command, or join the mistake in oblivion. She released him. He collapsed, gasping, and fled. Vespera returned her attention to Ceres and Naira, her composure restored as if the violence had never occurred. Here's what's going to happen, she said, smoothing her perfect gown. I'm going to take the child to the grand hall, the one with the beautiful skylight. Do you know why? Ceres said nothing, her arms wrapped protectively around Naira. Because, Vespera continued, when Aurelian arrives, I want him to see everything. I want him to witness what happens to kings who let their hearts make them vulnerable. I want him to understand that I am doing this for him, for the Dominion, for the future we'll build together once this contamination is removed. You're insane, Ceres breathed. I'm practical, Vespera corrected. Bloodlines are assets. Children are leveraged. And half-mortal abominations are extinction events waiting to happen. I'm simply ensuring that event never occurs. She moved toward Naira. Ceres's hand shot out, grabbing a brass candlestick from a nearby table. Don't, she warned, her voice shaking but deadly serious. Don't touch her. Vespera stopped, genuinely amused. Oh, Ceres. What are you going to do? Fight me? You're mortal. Fragile. Humans. I could snap your spine before you could blink. Then do it, Ceres said. But you'll have to go through me first. For a long moment, Vespera simply stared at her. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, full of anticipation and cruelty. Not yet, she said softly. You're part of the gift, after all. The loyal servant who died protecting the mistake. It's poetic. Aurelian will appreciate that. She turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. I'll give you an hour, Vespera said. Say your goodbyes. Comfort the child. Pray to whatever gods mortals pray to. And when I return... She looked back, her crimson eyes glowing in the dim light. I'm going to prepare a gift for my king. Something that will finally teach him what true strength looks like. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. And mercy, if it had ever existed in this citadel, left with her. The lock clicked shut, and Saris pressed her forehead against the door, breathing hard. 1 hour. 60 minutes between life and death. Behind her, Naira sobbed quietly, trying to be brave and failing. The sound broke something in Saris's chest, not her resolve, but the last fragile barrier between duty and devotion. She had been 17 when Aurelian found her, an orphan living in the ruins of a burned village, surviving on scraps and stolen bread. She'd expected death when the vampire king appeared in the darkness, expected to become food, or sport, or worse. Instead, he'd asked her a question. If I gave you safety, shelter, and purpose, would you guard something precious with your life? She'd said yes, without hesitation. Not because she was brave, because she had nothing left to lose. For 17 years, she'd kept that promise. Watched over Naira since the child's first breath, loved her as fiercely as if she were her own daughter, and asked for nothing in return except the privilege of keeping her safe. Now, death was inevitable. Vespera would kill them both. Aurelian might not arrive in time, and even if he did, he'll have to execute you publicly. Vespera's voice echoed in her memory. To prove the law still matters. Saris turned from the door, looking at Naira's tear-streaked face. I'm scared, the child whispered. I know, little star, Saris said, kneeling and pulling her close. But I need you to trust me now.
Can you do that?
Naira nodded against her shoulder.
Good.
Because we're not giving up. The nursery had secrets even Vespera didn't know. Saris moved quickly, pulling aside a tapestry to reveal a servant's passage, narrow, dark, designed for discreet movement through the citadel. She'd discovered it years ago while searching for better ventilation for Naira's room. Now it would be their escape. Stay close, Saris whispered, lighting a small lantern. No matter what you hear, stay with me. They slipped into the passage just as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, guards taking position, ensuring no one left the eastern wing alive. Saris's burned wrist throbbed where she'd invoked the forbidden bloodline. The flesh was blackened, blistered, weeping. But pain was irrelevant now. All that mattered was time. They moved through the walls like ghosts, Saris navigating by memory through passages she'd only walked once or twice before. Behind them, alarms began to wail. Vespera had discovered they were gone. Faster, Saris urged, half carrying Naira now. The passages opened into a storage room, then a disused library. Then, Corvin stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. I'm sorry, the head steward said, and he almost sounded sincere. She's paying me enough to retire 3 generations. You understand. Saris didn't answer with words. She swung the lantern. It shattered against Corvin's skull, oil and flame erupting across his face. He screamed, stumbling backward, and Saris ran, dragging Naira past him through smoke and chaos, toward the only place left that might offer sanctuary, the sunlit atrium. The most dangerous place in the citadel for a vampire. Natural light flooded through the massive glass dome, making the space unbearable for the undead during daylight hours. It was also the most beautiful room Naira had ever seen. Why here? Naira asked as they burst through the doors. Because, Saris gasped, collapsing against a marble column as blood seeped through her uniform. Corvin's claws had found her ribs. Your father taught me that vampires fear very little, but they fear the sun. She pressed her hand to the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. If she wants you, she'll have to come into the light. And even Vespera can't ignore that. Naira's small hands touched Saris's face. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're bleeding. Naira. I can help, the child said, her silver eyes beginning to glow. I can make it warm. I can. No, Saris said firmly, gripping Naira's hands. Remember what I told you. Don't let her see what you can do. Promise me. Naira's lip trembled. But you'll die. Not today, Saris lied, pulling the child behind her as footsteps echoed through the atrium entrance. Not while you still need me. Vespera emerged from the shadows at the edge of the sunlight, her crimson eyes narrowed against the painful glare. She looked at Saris, bleeding, trembling, defiant, and laughed. Oh, this is perfect, she purred, the loyal servant making her final stand. How very mortal of you. She took a step forward, smoke rising from her exposed skin where sunlight touched. Then another. Pain meant nothing to her, not compared to the satisfaction of crushing hope. Saris Vale, Vespera said, advancing slowly through the light, her flesh blistering and healing in an endless cycle of agony. You should have knelt. Saris pulled Naira closer, her bloodied hand raised in futile defense. Never, she whispered. Vespera smiled. And struck. We're approaching the moment everything changes. The moment a king realizes what true power really means. If your heart is already racing, imagine what's coming next. Before we continue, do me a favor. If you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is already ready, and you're going to want to be here for it. Comment your location, so I know where my incredible audience is from. Alright, let's see what happens when Aurelian finally arrives. The sunlight was merciless. It poured through the atrium's glass dome like liquid fire, transforming the marble floor into a field of blinding white. Every surface gleamed. Every shadow fled. It was a room designed to celebrate day, the one thing vampires had surrendered to claim immortality. Vespera Kane walked through it anyway. Her skin blistered and blackened with each step, smoke rising from her exposed flesh. The pain must have been extraordinary, the kind that would drive lesser vampires mad. But she didn't flinch, didn't slow. She simply smiled. Do you know why I'm doing this? Vespera asked conversationally, as if they were discussing whether rather than murder. Her voice remained steady despite the agony. It's not cruelty, Saris. It's clear. She gestured at Naira, who pressed herself against Saris's legs, trembling. That child is a lie made flesh. Half mortal, half vampire. Wholly impossible. Her existence destabilizes every law, every hierarchy, every truth our kind has built over millennia. Vespera's crimson eyes blazed. If word spreads that the vampire king fathered a half-breed and hid her, that he loves her, every ambitious parasite in the Dominion will see weakness. They'll come for him. For us. For everything. So you'll kill her, Saris said, her voice hollow. A child. To preserve your power. To preserve order, Vespera corrected. Sentiment is the enemy of survival. Love is a luxury kings cannot afford. I'm doing what Aurelian should have done 7 years ago. She took another step forward. The sunlight carved into her like a blade, but her healing factor kept pace, flesh burning and regenerating in an endless, hideous cycle. And I'm going to do it here. Vesper continued, spreading her arms to encompass the beautiful, sun-drenched space. In the light. Publicly. So when Aurelian arrives, he'll see the corpse and understand. This is what strength looks like. This is the cost of ruling. Naira's small voice cut through the horror. Saris? She looked up, her silver eyes wide and terrified. What does she mean? What's a corpse? The question shattered something in the room. Saris felt it, the moment Naira finally understood what was happening. Not in abstract terms. Not as a game or a story. Death. Real. Permanent, final. Please, Naira whispered, her hands clutching Saris's bloodied uniform. Please don't let her take me. I'll be good. I'll be quiet. I'll disappear. Just don't let her. Her voice broke into sobs. Saris's decision crystallized. She stepped forward, placing herself fully between Vespera and the child. Then slowly, deliberately, she knelt. Not in submission. In defiance. Her arms spread wide, her body a living shield, her bloodied face turned upward to meet Vespera's gaze. If you want her, Saris said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You'll have to destroy me first." Vespera paused, genuine surprise flickering across her features.
"You're mortal," she said.
"You'll die in seconds." "I know. You'll gain nothing. The child will still die." "Maybe," Saris agreed. "But she'll know someone loved her enough to bleed first. That's more than you'll ever understand." For a heartbeat, something almost like respect crossed Vespera's face. Then it vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "So be it." Vespera struck. Her clawed hand moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, aimed directly at Saris's heart, a killing blow meant to punch through flesh and bone and end resistance instantly. But the blow never reached Saris, because Naira screamed, not a cry of fear, a detonation of sound and light and heat. The child's silver eyes exploded into white-hot brilliance. Her small body became an inferno, not fire, but something older, more primal. The temperature in the atrium spiked so violently that the glass dome above cracked. Vespera's strike faltered, her hand catching Saris's shoulder instead of her heart. Still devastating, still lethal, but not instant. Saris collapsed, blood pooling beneath her as her vision blurred. But she smiled, because Naira was awake. The child stood alone now, no longer hiding, no longer small. Power radiated from her in visible waves, heat distortion bending the air, light emanating from her skin like a newborn star.
"Don't touch
her," Naira said, her voice layered with something ancient and terrible. Vespera stumbled backward, her confidence cracking for the first time. This wasn't supposed to happen. Half-mortal children didn't have power. They were weak, deluded.
Mistakes."
But Naira Nocthur was staring at her with eyes that held centuries of inherited rage, and the atrium itself seemed to pulse in response to the child's fury. The glass dome shattered. Sunlight poured down in blinding columns. And the doors, the massive ironwood doors at the atrium's entrance, began to crack. Not from inside, from outside. Something was coming. Something vast and furious and inevitable. The temperature dropped so fast Vespera's breath frosted in the air despite the inferno emanating from Naira. Darkness flooded the edges of the sunlight. Impossible, defiant darkness that pushed back against the day itself. And Vespera Kane, who had never known fear, finally understood what it meant to be prey. The doors exploded inward. Night consumed the atrium. And through the destruction stepped Aurelian Nocthur, crown blazing with shadow fire, eyes burning silver, his entire being radiating the cold, absolute wrath of a father who had arrived too late to prevent the wound, but just in time to deliver judgment. He saw Saris bleeding. He saw Vespera poised to strike again. He saw his daughter, his Naira, standing between them, glowing like a fallen star, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in 3,000 years, the vampire king froze. Not from fear. From recognition. This was the moment everything changed. Silence descended like a blade. The atrium, moments ago filled with screaming and shattering glass and the roar of awakening power, went utterly, impossibly still. Even the light seemed to hold its breath. Aurelian Nocthur stood framed in the destroyed doorway, shadow and crimson fire coiling around him like living armor. His crown, forged from blackened silver and set with a single blood-red stone, burned with eldritch flame. His eyes, silver as starlight and twice as cold, swept across the scene before him with the precision of a predator cataloging prey. Saris, collapsed on white marble now stained red, her hand pressed uselessly against the wound in her shoulder. Vespera, frozen mid-strike, smoke still rising from her blistered flesh, her crimson eyes wide with something that might have been shock or calculation or both. And Naira, his daughter, 7 years old and glowing like a newborn sun, tears streaming down her face, power radiating from her small body in waves that made the air itself tremble. She looked at him, really looked at him, and whispered the word that stopped his immortal heart. "Papa." The vampire king froze. Not from indecision. Not from fear. Not from the tactical assessment of threats and variables that had guided 3,000 years of survival. From recognition. This was the moment he'd spent 7 years dreading. The moment the lie became true. The moment his carefully constructed reign built on ruthless pragmatism and absolute control shattered against the simple, devastating reality of love. He'd told himself he was protecting her by staying away. He'd convinced himself that secrecy was safe. But standing here now, seeing her terrified and alone and glowing with power she didn't understand. He understood what he'd really been protecting. Not Naira. Himself. From the knowledge that she was the only thing in existence he couldn't bear to lose. The silence stretched. Vespera found her voice first. "Aurelian," she said carefully, lowering her clawed hand. "Thank the gods you've arrived. This situation has spiraled beyond." Silence. The word wasn't shouted. It was barely above a whisper. But the weight of it crushed the air from the room. Vespera's jaw snapped shut, her body going rigid, as if invisible chains had wrapped around her throat. Aurelian moved. Not quickly. Not with rage. With the terrible, inevitable certainty of an executioner approaching the block. He crossed the bloodied marble in 3 steps, his shadow extending before him like a living thing. When he reached Vespera, he simply raised one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, and pulled. Vespera screamed, not from pain, though pain came, but from the sensation of her magic being extracted. Threads of crimson power tore from her body like roots ripped from earth, coiling through the air toward Aurelian's outstretched hand. Her authority, her bloodline gifts, her coven standing, everything that made her Vespera Kane, heir to one of the oldest vampire houses in existence, was being stripped away. "You came into my home," Aurelian said, his voice utterly calm. "You threatened my blood. You struck the woman sworn to protect what I hold most precious." The crimson threads condensed into a sphere of pulsing light in his palm. "And you dared," his eyes burned brighter, "to call it strength." He crushed the sphere. Vespera collapsed, gasping, mortal weak for the first time in centuries. Aurelian turned away from her as if she'd ceased to exist. He looked at Naira, still glowing, still terrified, still his, and his expression softened into something the Citadel had never seen. Tenderness. "Naira," he said gently, kneeling despite the blood soaking into his coat. "It's all right. You're safe now." "She hurt Saris," Naira sobbed. She said I was wrong. That I shouldn't exist." Aurelian's jaw tightened. Then he stood, turning to face not just Vespera, but the doorway where guards and servants and stewards had gathered, drawn by the destruction, witnessing everything. The vampire king drew himself to his full height. Gasps. Whispers. Horror and awe rippled through the assembled witnesses. Coven law, ancient, absolute, inviolable, stated that vampire bloodlines must remain pure. That breeding with mortals was forbidden. That half-blood children were abominations. Aurelian had just publicly shattered that law, and dared anyone to challenge him. "Let it be known," he continued, his eyes sweeping across every face, "that any who threaten her, question her, or speak against her existence will answer to me personally. This is not negotiable. This is not subject to vote or covenant or treaty." He paused, letting the weight settle. "This is law." Vespera laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "You've doomed us," she gasped from the floor. "The covens will never accept this. They'll come for you. For her. For everything you've built. You've destroyed your own empire for a—" "Careful," Aurelian said softly, and something in his tone made even Vespera fall silent. He turned back to Naira, his expression gentling again. "Come here, little star." Naira ran to him, and Aurelian caught her. This small, warm, impossible miracle, and held her as if she were the only real thing in a world of shadows. Behind them, Saris smiled through her pain. And then the alarms began to scream. Not internal alarms. External. The citadel's perimeter wards flared and died as many somethings breached the outer defenses. A guard burst into the atrium, his face pale. My king. The Kane bloodline, there at the gates. An army. They're demanding. I know what they're demanding, Aurelian said calmly, still holding Naira. Tell them I'll be with them shortly. He looked down at his daughter. Stay with Ceres. No matter what you hear. Papa. I'll come back, he promised. I'll always come back. He set her down gently, then turned toward the destruction waiting beyond his walls. The truth had detonated the world. Now came the war. The Kane forces hit the citadel gates like a crimson wave. 300 vampires, ancient warriors, blood mages, shadow killers, all bearing the black and silver sigil of a house that had stood for 4 millennia. They came not for negotiation, but for annihilation. Aurelian watched them from the highest tower, his expression carved from ice. My king, Marcus, his second in command, appeared at his side, bloodied but steady. They're demanding Vespera's release. And the child's head. They'll receive neither. They outnumber our forces 2-1. Numbers, Aurelian said calmly, have never been what wins wars. He turned from the window, shadow coiling around him like armor. Seal the inner sanctum. Move Ceres to the healers, I don't care what it costs, keep her alive. Station guards around Naira. No one enters that room. No one. And Vespera? Aurelian's smile was colder than death. Leave her where she is. Let her watch what her ambition has bought. The battle began at midnight. The Kane forces breached the outer walls with blood magic, ancient spells that corroded stone and shattered wards. They poured into the citadel grounds like a flood, expecting chaos, resistance, fear. Instead, they found silence and traps. Aurelian hadn't spent 3,000 years building a fortress through brutality alone. He'd done it through strategy. Every corridor was a kill zone. Every shadow held waiting blades. Every step forward drew the enemy deeper into a carefully constructed maze of death. Now, Aurelian commanded from his position in the central courtyard. The citadel's remaining wards, the ones he'd kept hidden, the ones even Vespera hadn't known existed, ignited. Blood golems erupted from the stone itself. Shadow constructs materialized in impossible places. Ancient magic, dormant for centuries, awakened at their sovereign's call. The Kane forces found themselves fighting not an army, but a citadel, one that had been designed from its foundation to be an extension of the vampire king's will. And Aurelian's will was absolute. In the sealed chamber, Naira pressed her small hands against the enchanted glass, watching distant flashes of crimson light. Papa's fighting, she whispered. A healer, an ancient vampire named Thera, knelt beside her, checking Ceres's bandaged form on the bed behind them. He's protecting you, Thera said gently, as he always has. Will he win? He's the vampire king, child. He doesn't know how to lose. But even as she spoke, Thera felt it, the shift in Naira's power. The child was still glowing faintly, silver light pulsing beneath her skin in rhythm with her heartbeat. Not wild anymore. Not uncontrolled. Stabilizing. Whatever had awakened during the confrontation with Vespera was integrating, becoming part of Naira rather than separate from her. Thera had lived 2,000 years and had never seen anything like it. Your father is right to protect you, she murmured. You're going to change everything. The battle lasted 4 hours. When dawn threatened the eastern horizon, the Kane forces retreated, not routed, not destroyed, but beaten. They left behind 70 dead and twice that wounded. Aurelian's forces had lost 12. The vampire king stood in the ruined courtyard, surrounded by smoke and ash and the copper-sweet stench of spilled blood. His coat was shredded. His crown had cracked. But his eyes still burned with that terrible, absolute clarity. Marcus approached, limping slightly. They've withdrawn to their territories. But they're regrouping. This isn't over. No, Aurelian agreed. It's just beginning. He looked toward the chamber where Naira waited. but we survived. The citadel stands. And they know now, attacking my blood comes at a price they cannot afford. The other covens are watching, Marcus warned. Word will spread. About Naira. About the law you broke. Some will see opportunity. Let them. Aurelian's voice was steel wrapped in shadow. Let every ambitious parasite in the Dominion come. Let them throw themselves against these walls. They'll learn what their predecessors learned tonight. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the assembled defenders, bloodied, exhausted, but standing. I am not weak because I love. I am dangerous because of what I'll do to protect what I love. Remember that. Make sure they remember it. A cheer rose, ragged, fierce, defiant. The blood-veiled Dominion had survived. But it would never be the same. As the sun crested the horizon, Aurelian finally allowed himself to return to the sealed chamber. Ceres was unconscious but stable, her breathing steady beneath layers of healing magic. Naira sat beside the bed, her small hand holding Ceres's larger one. When Aurelian entered, his daughter looked up, and the fear that had filled her eyes was gone, replaced by something else.
Trust.
You came back, Naira said simply. I promised, Aurelian replied, kneeling beside her. I'll always come back. Outside, smoke still rose from the battlefield. Inside, for the first time in 7 years, the vampire king held his daughter without fear or secrecy. The cost had been devastating. The war was far from over. But they had survived the night. And sometimes that was enough. Ceres awakened to candlelight and the scent of healing incense. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then pain lanced through her shoulder, duller now, manageable, but present enough to ground her in memory. Vespera, the atrium. The strike meant for Naira. She tried to sit up, panic flooding her system. Naira is safe, a deep voice said from the shadows. Ceres's head snapped toward the corner, where Aurelian Noctur sat in a simple wooden chair, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. His crown rested on a nearby table. His coat was gone, replaced by a plain black shirt. He looked mortal. Almost. My king, Ceres whispered, trying to bow from the bed and immediately regretting it as pain flared. Don't, Aurelian said, rising and moving to her side with inhuman grace. You've bled enough for my mistakes. Ceres's throat tightened. I broke the law. The forbidden bloodline. I invoked it without permission. You saved my daughter's life. The law states. I am the law, Aurelian interrupted, his silver eyes meeting hers. And the law is about to change. Ceres stared at him, confused and terrified and not daring to hope. Aurelian pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, a posture so uncharacteristically informal it made him seem like a different person entirely. For 3,000 years, he said quietly, I have ruled through absolute control. No exceptions. No sentiment. No weakness. I told myself it was necessary. That love was a luxury kings couldn't afford. He looked toward the door, where Naira's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere down the corridor. I was wrong. Ceres's breath caught. You invoked the forbidden bloodline, Aurelian continued, because you understood something I had forgotten. Some things are worth more than law. Some things are worth more than thrones or treaties or the approval of ancient covens. He turned back to her, and something in his expression made Ceres's heart ache. You were willing to die for her. You took a blow meant to kill. You stood between my daughter and annihilation without hesitation. His voice roughened. You did what I should have done years ago. You chose love over fear. My king. Aurelian, he corrected gently. When we're alone, you may call me Aurelian. You've earned that right. Tears spilled down Ceres's cheeks. I thought you would execute me. I thought I would have to, Aurelian admitted. The law demanded it. Every advisor, every elder, every voice of reason told me that showing mercy would prove Vespera right. That sentiment had made me weak. He stood, moving to the window where dawn light was beginning to creep across the horizon. So, I executed the law instead. The assembled court was the largest gathering the Citadel had seen in decades. Every remaining member of the Bloodvale Dominion's inner circle stood in rigid formation: advisors, generals, blood mages, and representatives from allied covens who hadn't yet turned against the king. At the center of the hall, Vespera Kane knelt in chains. Stripped of her magic, her authority, and her beauty, the healing factor that had sustained her for centuries was gone, leaving her looking gaunt and mortal and small. Aurelian stood before his throne, Naira at his side, one hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. 3 days ago, he began, his voice carrying through the hall with supernatural clarity, this woman attempted to murder my daughter. She bribed my servants. She dismantled my words. She struck down one under my protection. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. By ancient law, Aurelian continued, her crimes demand execution. But I am not interested in ancient law anymore. The murmurs grew louder. Vesper Kane, you are hereby exiled from the Bloodvale Dominion. Your house's alliance is dissolved. Your betrothal to me is annulled. You have until sunset to leave my territory. If you return, I will not be merciful a second time. Vespera's head snapped up, shock and fury warring in her expression. You would exile me rather than execute me? This is weakness. This is pragmatism, Aurelian interrupted coldly. Your death would ignite a blood feud that would consume the Dominion for centuries. Your exile makes you irrelevant. Which fate do you think will hurt you more? Vespera's face twisted with rage, but she said nothing as guards dragged her from the hall. When the doors closed behind her, Aurelian turned to face his court. Bring Ceres Vale. Ceres entered, supported by Thera, still weak but standing. The assembled vampires stared at the mortal woman who had defied one of their kind and lived. Ceres Vale, Aurelian said formally, you invoked the forbidden bloodline, a crime punishable by death. Ceres lifted her chin, ready to face whatever came. You also saved the life of my daughter. You stood against overwhelming power. You chose courage over survival. Aurelian descended from his throne and, to the shock of every witness, knelt before her. Which is why I am rewriting the law. He drew a ceremonial blade and held it horizontally between them. I name you Naira Noctur's sworn guardian. Not as a servant. Not as an employee. As a kin-bound protector. You will have authority over her safety second only to mine. You will speak with my voice in matters concerning her welfare. And you will be afforded every protection and honor due to royal blood. Ceres's legs nearly gave out. My Aurelian, I'm just a... You are the woman who would not kneel when death demanded it, Aurelian said, his silver eyes burning with intensity. You are the bravest person in this citadel. And your family. He stood, sheathing the blade, and turned back to the assembled court. Let it be recorded. Let it be law. And let anyone who questions this decision remember what happened to the last person who threatened my blood. Silence. Then, slowly the court bowed. Not to Aurelian, to Ceres. Aurelian found Naira in the garden, a rare outdoor space protected by so many wards that even sunlight was filtered to safe levels. She was drawing again, this time with Ceres sitting beside her, still bandaged but smiling. Papa. Naira jumped up and ran to him without hesitation, without fear, throwing her small arms around his waist. Aurelian caught her, lifting her easily, and for a moment allowed himself to simply hold her. The war isn't over, he said quietly to Ceres over Naira's head. The covens will come. Some for revenge. Some for opportunity. The Dominion will face threats we've never seen. I know, Ceres replied, standing despite her pain. But we'll face them together. Aurelian nodded slowly. He had spent 3,000 years believing the throne was the greatest power in his world. That control, strategy, and ruthless pragmatism were the only tools that mattered. He'd been wrong. The throne was just stone and metal and empty authority. This, Naira's laughter, Ceres's loyalty, the fragile, dangerous miracle of a family he'd never planned for. This was power. This was worth fighting for. Worth dying for. Worth living for. Come, he said, setting Naira down and offering his hand. Let's go inside. I promised I'd teach you the names of the old gods. Really? Naira's eyes lit up. All of them. All of them, Aurelian confirmed, taking her hand. Then he extended his other hand to Ceres. Both of you should know them. Gods, after all, bow to no one. Not even kings. As they walked together toward the citadel, wounded, changed, but standing, the sun set behind them. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new wars, new challenges that would test everything they'd built. But tonight, in the quiet spaces between disaster and hope, the Vampire King learned what it meant to rule not through fear alone, but through love. And for the first time in 3,000 years, Aurelian Noctur did not face the darkness alone. Thank you for staying with me through Aurelian's journey. Stories like this remind us that even the most powerful beings can be transformed by love, and that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a maid standing between a child and death, whispering, "You'll have to go through me first." If this story moved you, do two things. First, subscribe so you're here tomorrow for the next one. Second, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love knowing this community is growing. See you tomorrow with another incredible tale.